went out to dinner with a young man, 20 years old. So I talked to him about marriage a lot. Tell him what to look for in a spouse. And he has a particular personality that requires a lot of assistance. He's a phlegmatic male, which means that he's susceptible to being overrun by a domineering female. By a domineering female. So he's a phlegmatic male. If he should happen to meet a choleric female, he's going to have problems. So I'm trying to help him avoid that. So anyway, I said to him, how do you know if you're sufficiently in love to get married? And he didn't hit any of the important points. So I asked the waitress, who is around 58. I said, let me ask you something. He's contemplating getting married. What advice do you have for him if he were looking for a spouse? She said, I said, if he were looking to date your daughter, what would you be telling your daughter to look out for? If he helps her, if he's abusive. And I said, all right. That it? And she told the other waitress, and the other waitress came over and said, I heard an interesting question. I'd like to... So she had nothing substantial to offer either. So I said to them, I said, you want to know what I told them? They said, yes. I said, well, I told him, do not get married. Do not. Unless you are ready to take care of this woman, were she to become completely incapacitated right after your marriage. Not only take care of her, but you would find it a joy. Now, you might think that's ridiculous, but it's far easier to take care of your wife, finding it a joy, than to take care of her and finding it to be a horrible burden. Wouldn't you agree with that? So my advice to him was, don't get married unless you would see that as a means by which you would just show her how much you love her. I said, if you don't see it like that, I'm begging you, don't get married. I said, otherwise, you're not loving her, you're really loving yourself. I said, which is a recipe for a bad marriage. That's my advice, all right? I share it with you, not that I'm some guru, but after being around for a while, that's what I've come to realize is a true marriage, or a true love in a marriage, where you're willing to sacrifice self in order to love your spouse. After all, doesn't Christ say that? Love your wife the way I love the church, which is to give up things for her. Not only things, but ultimately the greatest thing you have, which is your own life. And so a lot of men don't know that today. A lot of women don't know that either. There's a lot of selfish marriages out there. He makes good money, he'd make a good husband, which is true. Not necessarily exactly true, but it is a characteristic of a good husband if he's making good money. But he could be a bad husband. But you know what I'm saying. Or he's Catholic. That's a great characteristic. Okay. But sometimes the most important things are overlooked. And then you have a bad marriage. So trying to get him away from, oh, she's pretty, you know. She's pretty. So what? Continuing on with the Sacred Heart devotion and this receiving of the Blessed Sacrament often. Frequent Holy Communion. And so the Son of God calls this adorable mystery our daily bread. Why? To show how frequent the reception of it should be. He summons to his banquet the poor and the blind in order to teach us that no matter in what poverty a person may find himself, no matter what infirmities he may have, provided that he is still alive, he should not make any difficulty about eating this bread of life. The little fruit which a great number of people, especially priests, draw from frequent communion makes us sometimes doubt whether it is proper to receive communion so often. No better reply could be given on the subject than the reply of St. Francis de Sales, which is, I neither praise nor blame anyone for receiving communion every day, but I advise and exhort everyone to receive Holy Communion every Sunday, provided they have no affection for sin. These are the words of St. Augustine, he continues. Like him, I neither positively praise nor blame anyone for receiving Holy Communion every day. Believe that to the discretion of the spiritual director of the person who seeks guidance on this point, for the dispositions required for such frequent communion, being very select, it is not good to recommend it to everyone indiscriminately. And because these dispositions, although select, are found in many good souls, neither is it right to turn away people indiscriminately and dissuade them from it. Therefore, this matter should be dealt with according to the interior state of each one in particular. It would be an act of imprudence to advise such frequent Holy Communion for all without distinction, but it would also be an act of imprudence to blame anyone for it, especially when a person is following the advice of some worthy director. St. Catherine of Siena gave a very apt reply when the objection was raised against her practice of frequent communion, that St. Augustine neither praised nor blamed daily communion. Very well, said she, since St. Augustine does not blame the practice, I beg of you not to blame it either, and I shall be satisfied. But Philothea, you see that St. Augustine exhorts and counsels people very strongly to receive Holy Communion every Sunday. Do so then whenever possible, since, as I presume, you have no sort of affection for mortal sin, nor any for venial sin, you have the true disposition which St. Augustine requires. Indeed, you have even better, since not only have you no affection for committing sin, but you have no affection for sin. Accordingly, when your spiritual father permits, you can, with profit to your soul, receive Holy Communion even oftener than every Sunday. St. Francis de Sales continues, if worldlings ask you why you receive communion so often, tell them that it is to teach yourself how to love God, that it is in order to purify yourself from your imperfections, to deliver yourself from your miseries, to console yourself in your afflictions, and to gain a support in your weakness. Tell them that two classes of people ought to receive communion frequently. The perfect, being well disposed, they would be very wrong not to approach the source and fountain of perfection, and the imperfect, in order to be able to aspire justly to perfection. The strong, in order that they may not become weak, and the weak, in order that they may become strong. The sick, in order that they may be cured, and the healthy, in order that they may not fall into sickness. And that for yourself, being imperfect, feeble, and sick, you have need of frequent communion to keep united with him who is your perfection, your strength, and your physician. Tell them that those who have not much worldly affairs ought to receive communion often, because they can do so conveniently, and that those who have much worldly affairs ought to receive communion often, because they have need of it, just as a person who has to labor much and who has many cares should eat solid food and eat often. Tell them that you receive the Blessed Sacrament often in order to learn how to receive it well, because a person cannot do well a thing in which he has not often exercised himself. Receive Holy Communion, therefore, as often as possible, relying on the advice of your spiritual director. Believe me, hairs become white in wintertime in the mountains, Hares, because they neither see nor read anything but snow. But dint of adoring and eating beauty, goodness and purity itself, in this divine sacrament, you will become all beautiful, all good, and all pure. This is the advice which St. Francis de Sales gives to all those who have a real horror of mortal sin and an ardent desire for salvation. The desire for frequent communion is usually found in all those who have a lively faith and a real love for Jesus Christ. On the contrary, it is only too well established that when people give themselves up to the pleasures of the world, and when their love for Jesus Christ grows cold, they have no longer any desire for Holy Communion. Thus, there is no need to advise people steeped in vice to keep away from the Holy Table. They do that sufficiently themselves. Those corrupted souls, plunged in disorder, are never found eagerly desiring this bread of angels, which is the delight of pure souls and of all those who truly love Jesus Christ. Our Savior Jesus Christ himself repeatedly insisted in the clearest terms on the need of being frequently nourished with his flesh and of drinking his blood, particularly when he said, "This is the bread that came down from heaven. Not as your fathers did eat manna and are dead. He that eateth this bread shall live forever." By this comparison between the bread of angels and ordinary bread, the disciples could easily understand that, as bread is the daily nourishment of the body, and as manna had been the daily sustenance of the Jews in the desert, similarly the souls of Christians were to be nourished daily by this bread of angels, and have their strength renewed by it. Furthermore, when he orders us in the Lord's Prayer to ask for our daily bread, we are to understand by that, as nearly all of the Fathers teach, that the bread that was to be received each day was not so much the material bread which nourishes the body, but the Eucharistic bread. Accordingly, His Holiness, in the solicitude and zeal that animates him, greatly desiring that Catholics be urged to receive Holy Communion frequently and even daily, has entrusted the Sacred Congregation with the charge of examining and defining the above question. It said, "The Sacred Congregation of the Council, in the plenary session of December 16, 1905, has submitted this question to careful examination, and after weighing diligently and maturely the reasons on both sides, it has drawn up and issued the following decree." This is about receiving communion. Remember that up until 1905, people were not allowed to receive daily communion. No, I'm sorry, the age of communion was teenage years. It was older. Pope St. Pius X changed that. Number 1, frequent and daily communion, inasmuch as it is extremely desired by our Lord, Jesus Christ, and by the Catholic Church, should be made accessible to all the faithful, of whatever class or condition they may be, so that no one who is in the true state of grace, and approaches the table with a right and pious intention, should be prevented from doing so. You have to have the right intention. 2, a right intention consists in approaching the holy table not through habit or vanity, or from human motives, but in order to please God and become more intimately united to Him by charity. That's the motive for Holy Communion, to be united to Him by charity. And by virtue of this divine remedy, to combat all faults and infirmities. 3, although it is very desirable that those who receive communion frequently and daily be exempt from at least fully deliberate venial sins, desirable, and have no affections for these sins, nevertheless it is sufficient that they have no grave sin, and have a firm purpose of never committing any in the future. With this firm and sincere purpose of the soul, it is impossible that those who receive communion every day should not free themselves from venial sins also, and gradually from all affections for these sins. 4. Although the sacraments of the new law produce their effect ex opere operato, the extent of these effects will be in proportion to the perfection of the disposition of those who receive them. Ex opere operato means that the sacrament does it by itself. So if you were to say, for example, I want Father so-and-so to baptize my child, that's not going to do anything, because the sacrament itself works in the soul of the baptized ex opere operato. Catholics will therefore take care to make a diligent preparation before communion and a fitting thanksgiving after, according to each one's strength, condition, and duties. So, preparation for communion, a meditation on what you're about to do. In this book, it suggests that the night before you receive communion, you do some preparation. And then a proper thanksgiving. So we want to make a note of that. Number 5, in order to that frequent and daily communion be made with great prudence and merit, it is important that each one ask the advice of his confessor. Let the confessor take care not to deprive anyone of frequent and daily communion who is in the state of grace and approaches with the right intention. There you have it. Frequent and daily communion. That's the second means to acquire this great love of Jesus Christ. You becoming intimate with him. The first one was prayer, okay? The third one is going to be visits to the Blessed Sacrament. That's one of my favorites. The fourth is fidelity in acquitting ourselves exactly of the practices of this devotion. Fifth is a tender devotion to the Blessed Virgin. Sixth is special devotion to St. Aloysius Gonzaga. Sixth is devotion to St. Margaret Mary and to Blessed Claude de la Colombière. Very important to make notes on this stuff, people. You'll never remember this stuff. A day's retreat each month. Folks, we're going to fall in love with God. We have a lot of work to do, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it because we're going to pray very much, be recollected, have a hatred of sin, and you become so close to God that He can't help but to give you the desires of your heart, so long as they're not opposed to your salvation. Okay? And there you have it. I'll leave you with that. It's only a 20-minute video, but still. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Who knows, maybe I'll get up in the middle of the night and do it.